Going missing while your car is in a repair shop in California. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. On July 16th, 2013, Matthew Greene, a math teacher from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, was on a hiking trip in Mammoth Lakes, California. Matthew's car was at a repair shop in Mammoth Lakes, and he was simply waiting for it to be fixed so that he could get on and meet up with his friends who he had been hiking with to that point in Colorado. Matthew Greene was born September 8, 1973, to Robert and Patricia Greene in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, a rural area of my home state. From early childhood, Matthew, his sister, and his father were avid hikers, campers, swimmers. They would spend a lot of time in the outdoors, simply because when you come from rural Pennsylvania, that's really all there is to do. Matthew would go on to graduate from Pennsylvania State University, my alma mater, in the late 90s, and then join the Peace Corps from 1998 to 2001. Eventually, he would go on to become a much beloved math teacher in the local school district, and he lived in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, up to the time of his unfortunate and rather mysterious disappearance. Every year, Matthew and his friends would take a hiking trip out west. They would go hike different peaks, explore different parks, and camp along the way. They usually would take their cars and go through several different states, or at least several different areas, during these ventures. Aged 39 in the year 2013, Matthew was a very experienced hiker and camper. His friends had no worries when they left him behind at Mammoth Lakes after his car broke down. Now, Matthew was driving a Subaru. Subarus are pretty easy to fix, so he just brought it into a local repair shop. It was expected that the car would be finished the repairs on July 18th, 2013, so, with his friends not wanting to waste time and Matthew not wanting to hold up the rest of the trip, he told them to keep going along and he would catch up with them in Colorado sometime around the 18th. So, while his friends went on with the rest of the journey, Matthew decided to just spend a few more days hiking around Mammoth Lakes. He was staying at Shady Rest Campground, which is about 3 to 4 miles by air from the peak of the mountain, Mount Mammoth. Now this would equate to about 5 miles of walking to get to the actual base of the trails that he would be hiking up. To give you some background on Mammoth Lakes, this is a small, sleepy California tourist town that is situated directly between Yosemite National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, Inyo National Forest, and Sierra National Forest. So as far as all of these different national parks things goes, this is about the worst place you could possibly be. Mammoth Lake sits at an elevation of 7,881 feet, has an average July temperature of 78 degrees, and the humidity is extremely low, but the wind speeds can get pretty high, and on the day that Matthew went missing, there was no rain, so it would have been a very hot and pretty intense day, even without all the mugginess. On this specific day, July 16th, 2013, civil twilight was at 8:47 p.m., which means that the sun began to set in the visibility area of the town at that time. Now, of course, astronomical twilight and nautical twilight are different from civil twilight, but for all intents and purposes, at 8:47 p.m., it would have been getting dark. And that is important because of specific point of separation details here. You see, the last time anyone heard from Matthew Greene was 4:30 p.m. on the day he went missing. He had called into the repair shop to check on his car, and that was the last time anyone can record hearing his voice. Now, later that night at 8:30 p.m., he would send a text message to his friends, but of course we cannot confirm that that was actually him sending the text message. As we know, often when people are kidnapped, their kidnapper will use their phone to make people think that they're okay. That could be sending text messages, emails, updating a Facebook status, any number of things. So, while it's not certain that Matthew's disappearance was related to a kidnapping, there's also the very real possibility that that text message was not sent by him. Another case where this occurred more recently was the Gabby Petito case, where Brian Laundrie was using her phone to make people think that she was okay for days while he left her body in a national park, rather than, nutting up and admitting to what he did. On the subject of that case, by the way, currently, the belief is that Brian Laundrie is dead, his parents knew he left the house but didn't know where he went, and that this was all just some giant tragedy with no justice. I disagree with that because nobody doesn't know where someone is and then finds them in 30 minutes when the FBI couldn't find them in over a week. To quote myself, if Brian actually was mauled to death by alligators, those alligators did God's work. But back to the topic at hand. When Matthew was last confirmed alive at 4:30 p.m. on July 16, 2013, it would have been 81 degrees with wind speeds of about 26 miles per hour. Later on, at 8:30 p.m., when he sent that last text message, the wind speeds would have been closer to 8 to 12 miles an hour, and the weather in general would have been a lot more mild at about 75, maybe 70 degrees. Now, it is unclear what the contents of that text message that he sent to his friends were, but whatever they were, it must have given them some reason to, the very next day, call in a missing persons report. Because usually, if somebody is off hiking or camping and they tell you that they're not going to see you for 2 days, you kind of assume you might not hear from them. But his friends decided the very next day to call in a missing persons report, and that kind of muddies the waters here. Furthermore, Matthew's last known cell phone ping was on the north face of Mount Mammoth, implying that at 8:30 p.m., just 17 minutes before civil twilight, Matthew was still on the mountain hiking, which doesn't make a ton of sense because he was only carrying his hiking backpack, some snacks, and his shoes and other important aspects of clothing. All of his gear was left back at the campsite. So Matthew should not have been on the mountain at that time. It's very dangerous to hike at night, especially in this region of California. From the area where his cell phone last pinged, it was about, at the very least, a 5-mile walk back to his campsite. That's 60 to 90 minutes if you're in shape and not tired. It was 8:30 p.m., Matt had been out hiking all day. The chances that he was not exhausted yet are very low, so that could put 90 minutes to even 2 hours in terms of this hike back to his campsite, which would be the most likely time for someone to find an accident in the forest on a mountain. You know, when it's dark, you can't see, nocturnal animals are coming out, you're going to be disoriented. If he were to have an accident, a natural problem, this is about the time that it would have happened. But Matthew was not unintelligent about his hiking choices. His friends said that he was an avid and skilled not only hiker, but also ice and rock climber. Matthew was also carrying a large black and white hiking backpack, bright yellow shoes, crampons, and an ice axe. So, while he wasn't the best outfitted he could have been, he was certainly visible and was carrying the supplies he would need to get himself out of not every situation, but a good amount of common ones. We don't know what happened with the rest of that evening, but what we do know is that the very next day, Matthew's friends called the police, called his parents, and then went out to look for him themselves. Now, the police department and local search and rescue, because they didn't have an exact location for where Matthew went missing, couldn't actually launch a search. There was way too big of an area. So, unfortunately, it was left up to volunteers, family, and friends to actually do the searching. So I was wrong. When I initially did the research for this video, I believed that the search was launched on the 17th of July 2013, when in reality, that was not the case.
You know what was the case, though?
What?
My birthday's on the 9th.
As I was saying, in reality, there was some discussion about whether or not he was missing for almost 2 weeks after his disappearance. The two friends that he had been hiking with in California, John and Jill, were beginning to feel some concern when they didn't hear back from him after a few days of trying to reach him. So they reached out and they told his family, but his family, knowing that Matthew was a very experienced outdoorsman, decided that they were going to give him a few more days anyway because it probably wasn't a big deal and they didn't want to worry anybody. Eventually, John and Jill would reach out to Matthew's family, but his mother and sister were confident enough in his abilities that they figured they would just give him a few more days. But by the time the 26th of July rolled around, they decided it was time to file a formal complaint.
Do you mean like a missing persons report?
Yes, that. The sheriff's department did organize something of a search effort, but because there was no pinpoint location where Matthew had actually gone missing, they couldn't actually start a search and rescue operation. So Matthew's family and friends had to come in and search the entire 5 by 20 mile area on their own.
Aren't you getting ahead of yourself?
Good point. I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, so we'll get on with the story. Aside from knowing the general whereabouts of his last known location, there was one other piece of evidence. Matthew had a habit of tearing the pages out of hiking and camping guides and taking them with him on his trips rather than carrying the entire book. And then when he got home, he would reinsert those pages back into the guide as kind of a trophy. When comparing Matthew's book to other copies of the exact same guide, what they found was that the pages he ripped out involved a 5-mile by 20-mile area that encompassed to the east, Matt's campsite, and to the west, mountains that were over 13 miles away from it. But that was better than nothing. It at least gave them a basic starting point of where to search. And that search was pretty extensive. It went on for a couple of weeks. Matt's family was involved. They were looking for him. It was not, a half-hearted effort. This is a genuine, intense attempt to find this man who went missing. Like I said, he was beloved in his area. He was a well-known member of the community. Everyone wanted to see Matthew return home safe. Naturally, one of the first places that was searched was Matt's campsite, where they found his sleeping bag, his tent, his bivvy, his stove, and a few other supplies. What this told searchers and potential rescuers was that Matthew had not left that morning intending to stay out overnight, which is what makes the idea that he was sending texts from the mountain at 8:30 p.m. so much more confusing. Matthew should have been well on his way home by that point if he was not intending to stay the night on the mountain. For those who don't know, a bivvy is sort of a miniature hiking tent. It's a shelter, but it really is only slightly larger than your sleeping bag. The idea is that you set it up and then you slide inside of it, and it gives you protection from rain, wind, and other elemental factors without being quite as spacious or comfortable as a full tent. If Matt had been intending to go out for 1, maybe 2 nights, he would have absolutely taken that bivvy and his sleeping bag. Since he didn't, you can reasonably assume that he had no intention of actually being on the mountain after sunset. To add on to this belief that he was not intending to be camping, he actually hadn't even taken out a camping permit. The only place that he was permitted, registered to be camping, was at Shady Rest Campground to the east of Mount Mammoth. After checking Matt's campground, they actually went on to check a number of trails that Matt had expressed interest in hiking. These included Mount Ritter, Mount Banner. These included 2 mountains, Mount Ritter and Mount Banner, along with several others. Now, hikers went and actually checked those trails all the way up, went to the summit, checked the logbooks because hikers like to scribble their name into a book when they climb a peak. They checked on that. Nothing. There was no evidence that Matt had actually successfully climbed any of these mountains. After a couple of weeks of searching and continuing to run out of leads, his family and friends finally begged Search and Rescue for a dog team, but Search and Rescue's response was that any trail of his scent would be over 2 weeks old, and a lot of the trails were not safe for the dogs to actually be hiking on, just because of the way in which the nature had actually formed these geographic formations. So they essentially had to deny them on the grounds that A, the dogs wouldn't be able to pick up the scent, and B, it wouldn't be safe for the dogs. After several grueling weeks of searching, it was eventually determined that Matt was not going to be found, and it was best to suspend the search. Bulletins were posted, hikers were informed, and anyone who was going to be in the area was given the opportunity to at least know what Matt looked like. Matt was 39 years old, he was 155 pounds, he was 5 feet 11 inches tall, and he had some dirty blonde hair and bright eyes. This was what everyone was told, people were given pictures, and for the remainder of the summer, this was kind of an all-points bulletin. They just wanted everybody to know, hey, if you see this man, if you see anything he was wearing, let us know. It could be the key to finding him most likely not alive, but at the very least giving some closure to his family. And in August of 2013, a pair of glasses resembling those that Matt was known to possess was found on a trail in the area in which Matthew went missing. Unfortunately, when the glasses were compared to Matthew's actual prescription, they did not match. Matthew had very severe astigmatism and would have struggled to see with glasses that were not his particular prescription. There was silence on the case for a long time, several months, and in January of 2014, Matthew's family in the state of Pennsylvania decided to apply for a death certificate, to put the matter to rest, to hold a funeral, and to move on from the horrible tragedy of losing a family member. The Mammoth Lakes Police Department, however, did not close their case and continued to make people aware that Matthew could still be out there and a recovery of his body was possible. In June of 2019, an author by the name of Jennifer Crittenden presented a book in Lehigh Valley, the area where Matt was living at the time that he went missing, which compared Matt's disappearance to that of Peter Starr in 1933 in the same geographic region. Peter Starr went missing in the Minarets, which are a set of peaks just to the south of Mount Ritter and Mount Banner, and just to the west of Mount Mammoth. So, the same general area that Matt had gone missing. Starr, however, was eventually found by other mountaineers. He had fallen from a very high place, landed on a ledge, and died there. Matthew, as far as we know, was not hiking any of these very tall peaks. He was just out for a leisurely stroll on Mount Mammoth. As a result, the comparison is fair because it's in the same area, but it likely would not explain how Matt might be found. It would really just say, this isn't the first time that this has happened. Later that same year, in October of 2019, hikers found a skeleton in the generally same region, but in this case, it was 78 miles southeast in Kings Canyon National Park, so it's very unlikely that it was Matthew, and on top of that, authorities suggested that the skeleton and the state it was in implied that this was a much older death, possibly from the 70s or 80s. It is important at this moment to say that Matthew's case is not a typical missing 411 case. We don't know enough about the circumstances of his disappearance to make a determination of whether or not it could have been an accident, whether it could have been an intentional death, or whether it could have been something supernatural. There are certain aspects that match, point of separation, the change in elevation, granite fields, boulders, things like that, but because we don't know the exact way in which he went missing, it doesn't get filed in the same way. This one is simply a very strange disappearance, and what could it possibly be? Well, serial killers have been active in Yosemite before, and as I said earlier in this video, it is not uncommon for murderers or kidnappers to use their victim's phone to delay search efforts by sending texts, updating Facebook statuses, so on and so forth. It is also entirely possible that Matt slipped somewhere, fell down into a ravine, and wasn't found simply because there weren't enough searchers and it's hard to see certain things. Now, his clothing was bright enough that if he wasn't buried, he would be visible, but at the same time, you'd have to look over a very large swath of territory in order to find him, and they just didn't have the manpower for that search. The one thing about this that I did find odd, and rather inexplicable under the circumstances, is that Matthew's cell phone was untraceable. It was either dead, or it was off, or it was broken. Now, that suggests something sudden happened. That Matt didn't get lost, that he wasn't just trying to find his way back, but rather there was a moment at which Matt's cell phone stopped working. And the idea that he would look at it, see that the battery was low, not be carrying a portable charger, and not think to inform people or to text out his exact coordinates and stay there, that doesn't make sense to me. So it implies that something very sudden happened. Could that have been Matt falling and his phone breaking because he hit a rock? Yeah. Could it have been that he was kidnapped? Absolutely. Could it have been that he was attacked by a mountain lion? I'm going to be honest, I did not look into if there is mountain lion activity in this area, but I would not be shocked because it's California. So there's any number of things it could have been. Is it as mysterious as the cases of Aaron Hedges, Tom Messick, or Dennis Barton? No. But at the same time, it's certainly a perplexing story for all of the reasons that I listed. Now, as we get to the end of this video, must say, if you like what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, please help us out by subscribing to us on Patreon, or at the very least, smashing the like button, hitting the subscribe button, hitting that notification bell, and if you're feeling a little saucy, share this video with some people. It would make us very happy, it will help us fund Aiden's Brazilian butt lift, and it will make sure that we continue making this content in the future, and hopefully continue to grow the level to which we are able to talk about these cases, and maybe bring some closure to situations like the case of Matthew Greene, if we can actually go out and investigate them ourselves, as we want to do. That is one of the projects we are working on, and your support would make that possible. Once again, I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.